shattered glass. The crystal wine glass shattered against the Italian marble floor, red wine spreading like blood across the pristine white surface. Victoria Sterling stood frozen in the doorway of her own home, watching her husband, Julian Blackthorne, kiss another woman with the passion he hadn't shown her in 3 years. Oh God, Julian. The IPO celebration can wait, the woman breathed against his lips. Victoria recognized her immediately, Natasha Winters, 26 years old. Stanford, MBA and Julian's newest strategic advisor. The woman wore Victoria's anniversary necklace, the one Julian claimed had been lost during their last vacation. Julian's hands roamed territories that had once belonged to Victoria, territories he had abandoned without explanation or apology. Soon, darling. Once the divorce is finalized, we won't have to sneak around anymore. The words hit Victoria like physical blows. Divorce. He was planning to divorce her, and she was the last to know. After 12 years of marriage, 8 years of supporting his struggling startup, 4 years of watching him become Silicon Valley royalty, while she faded into the background of their success story. Victoria backed away silently, her bare feet, making no sound on the cold marble. In their bedroom, what used to be their bedroom, she sat heavily on the edge of the bed they no longer shared. Julian had been sleeping in his study for months, claiming late-night video conferences with overseas clients. Now she understood what those conferences actually were. Her reflection in the vanity mirror looked like a ghost. When had she become so pale, so thin, so invisible? The vibrant marketing executive who had once commanded boardrooms had been systematically erased, replaced by the perfect tech wife who attended charity galas and smiled prettily for Forbes photographers. The sound of the front door closing snapped her back to reality. Julian's footsteps echoed up the stairs, measured and confident. He knocked gently on their bedroom door. "Victoria? Sweetheart, are you home? I saw your car in the driveway." The endearment felt like mockery now. Victoria opened the door, studying the man she had loved since graduate school. Julian Blackthorne, at 42, was undeniably handsome, silver threading through his dark hair, sharp blue eyes that had once looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. Now those eyes held nothing but calculation. "How was the celebration dinner?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "Tedious. Investors talking about market projections until midnight." Julian loosened his tie, the same navy silk she had given him for Christmas. "You know how these things are." Victoria nodded, though she hadn't been invited to the IPO celebration, hadn't been invited to anything involving Blackthorne Technologies for the past year. She was no longer an asset. She was simply furniture in their carefully curated life. "Julian," she said quietly, "we need to talk." Something flickered in his eyes, annoyance perhaps, or irritation that she was interrupting his routine. "Can it wait until morning? It's been a long day." "No," Victoria said, finding strength in her voice she hadn't felt in years. "It can't wait." She watched as Julian's mask of concerned husband slipped just slightly, revealing the cold businessman underneath. The man who had built an empire by acquiring smaller companies and stripping them for parts. The man who was now preparing to do the same thing to their marriage. "What's this about?" he asked. Victoria met his gaze directly for the first time in months. "It's about the fact that you're planning to divorce me, and I'm supposed to pretend I don't know." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Outside their bedroom window, San Francisco glittered in the distance, a city of dreams and broken promises. Inside, a marriage died with the quiet dignity of something that had been slowly suffocating for years. Julian's expression didn't change, but Victoria saw the moment he decided to stop pretending. "We'll discuss terms tomorrow with the lawyers." Terms. As if their life together was just another business transaction. Victoria smiled, and it felt like the first genuine expression she'd worn in years. "Yes," she said. "We will. Retry UB Part 2 to 5 Edit Part 2, Rising from Ashes." 6 months after the divorce papers were signed, Victoria Sterling sat in a cramped coffee shop in Oakland, staring at financial documents that made her stomach turn. Across from her, Elena Rodriguez tapped manicured nails against her tablet, her dark eyes sharp with the kind of intelligence that had built careers from nothing. "Your ex-husband is brilliant. I'll give him that," Elena said, scrolling through the evidence Victoria had compiled. Shell companies, phantom art purchases, charity donations to organizations that exist only on paper. He's been laundering money for years. Victoria wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, seeking warmth. The settlement had left her with enough money to survive, but Julian had frozen most of their joint assets during the proceedings. "I documented everything during the marriage. I thought I was being paranoid." "You were being smart." Elena Rodriguez had built her reputation as a talent agent and life coach for women rebuilding after divorce. She was 43, fierce, and had her own history with powerful men who underestimated her. "The question is, what do you want to do with this information?" Before Victoria could answer, her phone buzzed. Marcus Chen's name appeared on the screen. She'd been surprised when the mysterious tech investor had reached out, claiming he'd heard about her situation through mutual connections. More surprised when he'd offered to meet. "Miss Sterling." The voice was smooth, controlled. "I believe we have much to discuss about Julian Blackthorne." Victoria glanced at Elena, who nodded encouragingly. "Where did you want to meet?" "The Meridian Hotel downtown. 1 hour. And Ms. Sterling? Bring those documents you've been collecting." The line went dead. Victoria stared at her phone, pulse quickening. "How did he know about the documents?" Elena's smile was predatory. "Honey, in Silicon Valley, information travels faster than venture capital. If Marcus Chen is interested, your ex-husband has bigger problems than a messy divorce." An hour later, Victoria found herself in the Meridian's penthouse suite, facing a man who radiated quiet power. Marcus Chen was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 38, with the kind of sharp intelligence that made boardrooms nervous. His reputation preceded him, the ghost investor who bought failing companies and transformed them overnight. "Julian. Blackthorne destroyed my first startup 7 years ago," Marcus said without preamble, pouring whiskey into crystal tumblers. "Hostile takeover disguised as a merger. He gutted my team, stole my technology, then buried the patents so no one else could use them." Victoria accepted the whiskey, studying Marcus's face. There was pain there, carefully controlled but unmistakable. "You want revenge." "I want justice. There's a difference." Marcus pulled out his own tablet, showing her financial records that made her documented evidence look elementary. "Your ex-husband has been running a sophisticated money laundering operation. Through his charitable foundation, art purchases that never happen, donations to causes that don't exist, real estate deals in countries with no extradition treaties. How long have you been investigating him?" 7 years. But I needed someone with inside access, someone who understood his methods. Marcus's eyes met hers. Someone he would never suspect of having the intelligence to document his crimes. The insult, even as a compliment, stung. Victoria set down her whiskey harder than necessary. "He always thought I was too trusting, too naive, the devoted wife who never asked inconvenient questions." "But you did ask questions. You just asked them quietly." Marcus leaned forward. "The evidence you've collected could bring down his entire operation, but it needs to be presented by someone with credibility, someone the federal prosecutors will believe." Victoria understood what he was offering, a chance to reclaim her voice, her intelligence, her power, but she also understood the cost. "Once I testify against him, there's no going back to any semblance of a quiet life." "There never was," Elena interjected from across the room, where she'd been quietly making phone calls. Julian's been telling people you had a nervous breakdown during the divorce, that you're unstable, possibly dangerous. He's systematically destroying your reputation as a preemptive strike. The betrayal cut deeper than the affair, deeper than the divorce. Julian wasn't content to simply discard her. He needed to ensure she could never threaten him. Victoria thought of Natasha Winters, probably moving into their house, wearing her jewelry, inheriting the life she'd helped build. "What exactly are you proposing?" Victoria asked Marcus. "A partnership. You provide the inside evidence. I provide the resources and connections to ensure it reaches the right people. Federal prosecutors, financial crimes investigators, maybe even the FBI's white-collar crime division." Victoria looked out the penthouse windows at the San Francisco skyline. Somewhere out there, Julian was probably celebrating another successful day of building his empire on lies and stolen dreams. He'd counted on her silence, her compliance, her continued invisibility. "I want more than justice," she said finally. "I want him to know that the woman he threw away is the one who brought him down." Marcus smiled, and it was sharp as broken glass. "Then welcome to the war, Victoria Sterling." The Phoenix emerges. The FBI field office in downtown San Francisco buzzed with the kind of energy that preceded major arrests. Detective Rosa Martinez spread the evidence across the conference table like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. Victoria Sterling sat across from her, no longer the broken woman who had stumbled into the coffee shop 6 months ago. "Your documentation is extraordinary," Detective Martinez said, her Latina accent barely detectable after 20 years in law enforcement. "Most white-collar cases take years to build. You've handed us Julian Blackthorne's entire operation on a silver platter." Victoria had spent 3 months working with Marcus Chen and Elena Rodriguez, turning her scattered evidence into an airtight case. The nervous wife, who had once photographed documents in secret, had become a forensic accountant's dream, methodical, thorough, unbreakable. "Julian always said I was too detail-oriented," Victoria replied, her voice steady now. "He never realized. I was documenting everything he did." The conference room door opened, and Alexander Kane walked in, with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. At 45, he was Julian's primary competitor in the tech world, but where Julian was flash and ego, Alexander was substance and strategy. "Ms. Sterling," Alexander said, extending his hand, "thank you for agreeing to meet. Marcus has told me remarkable things about your work." Victoria had been surprised when Marcus suggested bringing Alexander into their alliance. Kane Industries was Blackthorne Technology's biggest rival, and Alexander had his own reasons for wanting Julian destroyed. But she'd learned to trust Marcus's strategic thinking. "Detective Martinez," Alexander nodded to the FBI agent, "I assume you've reviewed the financial records I provided?" The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands were the missing piece, Martinez confirmed. "Combined with Ms. Sterling's evidence of the phantom art purchases and fake charity donations, we have enough to bring RICO charges." Victoria felt a thrill of satisfaction. RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Julian wouldn't just face financial crimes charges, he'd be prosecuted as the head of a criminal enterprise. "There's something else," Alexander said, pulling out his tablet. "Julian's been courting investors for his next venture, a merger with Pinnacle Systems. He's using inflated valuations based on the laundered money to make Blackthorne Technologies appear more valuable than it is." "Securities fraud," Martinez said grimly. "That's federal prison time, not just fines." Victoria studied Alexander's face, noting the careful way he controlled his expression. "You want something in return for this information?" Alexander smiled, and for a moment she saw why he was considered one of Silicon Valley's most formidable players. When Julian's empire collapses, there will be assets available for acquisition, legitimate assets, his technology patents, his development team, his client base. I want first option to acquire them through proper channels. Profiting from his downfall, Victoria mused. Ensuring his innovations don't disappear with his crimes, Alexander corrected. Julian may be a criminal, but some of his technology could genuinely help people. Under proper management. Detective Martinez gathered the evidence files. We'll need you to testify before the grand jury next week, Ms. Sterling. Are you prepared for that? Victoria thought of the woman she'd been a year ago. Invisible, compliant, convinced she was worthless without Julian's validation. That woman would have been terrified of facing a room full of prosecutors and federal agents. I've been preparing my entire marriage, she said. After Martinez left, Alexander and Victoria found themselves alone in the conference room. Through the windows, San Francisco's financial district gleamed in the afternoon sun, towers of glass and steel built on ambition and dreams. Can I ask you something? Alexander said. What was the moment you decided to fight back? Victoria considered the question. There had been so many moments of humiliation, so many small cruelties that had chipped away at her sense of self. But one memory stood out. Julian hosted a dinner party for potential investors 6 months before I left him. I spent all day preparing, cooking, cleaning, making sure everything was perfect. When his guests arrived, he introduced me as the wife, then spent the evening talking about me like I wasn't there, discussing my emotional instability, my inability to understand business. She paused, remembering the sting of laughter from people she'd considered friends. One of his guests asked what I did before marriage, and Julian answered for me. He said I'd been a marketing assistant or something, completely erasing my MBA, my years as a senior marketing executive, my contributions to building his company. That night I realized he wasn't just leaving me for another woman. He was erasing me entirely. Alexander was quiet for a moment. And now, Victoria smiled. And it was nothing like the careful, pleasing expressions she'd perfected as Julian's wife. This smile had teeth. Now he's about to learn that erasing someone and defeating them are two very different things. Her phone buzzed. With a text from Elena. Press conference scheduled for tomorrow. Time to introduce the world to the real Victoria Sterling. Victoria looked out at the city where she'd been invisible for so long, where she'd believed herself powerless and worthless. Tomorrow, that same city would know her name for all the right reasons. The phoenix wasn't just rising from the ashes. She was about to burn down the entire forest that had tried to bury her. Part 4. Burning Bridges. The federal courthouse erupted in camera flashes as Victoria Sterling walked up the marble steps, flanked by Elena Rodriguez and a team of federal prosecutors. 6 months of preparation had led to this moment, the day Julian Blackthorne would face justice for years of financial crimes. Inside courtroom 4A, Judge Rebecca Harrison commanded the space with the authority of someone who had presided over white-collar crime cases for 15 years. At 62, she was known for her sharp intelligence and intolerance for financial predators who believed wealth placed them above the law. The United States versus Julian Marcus Blackthorne, Judge Harrison announced. The defendant will rise. Victoria watched from the gallery as Julian stood, his expensive suit unable to mask the tension in his shoulders. Beside him sat his legal team, 3 attorneys from San Francisco's most prestigious firm, their billable hours already exceeding most people's annual salaries. At the prosecution table, Assistant District Attorney Patricia Wong laid out the government's case with surgical precision. Your Honor, the evidence will show that the defendant operated a sophisticated money laundering scheme for over 5 years, using phantom art purchases, fake charitable donations, and shell companies to hide millions in illegally obtained funds. Julian's lead attorney, Charles Morrison, rose for the defense. Your Honor, my client is a successful businessman who may have made accounting errors, but there was no criminal intent. Objection to characterizing a 5-year criminal enterprise As accounting errors, Wong interrupted smoothly. Sustained, Judge Harrison said, her tone suggesting she'd heard enough corporate doublespeak for one morning. Victoria felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see David Park, the media mogul, who had agreed to ensure coverage of the trial. At 58, Park controlled 3 major news networks and had his own history with Julian, a bitter rivalry over broadcast technology patents. Your testimony is scheduled for this afternoon, Park whispered. My people will be broadcasting. Live. The world is about to meet the real Victoria Sterling. When Victoria was called to the witness stand, the courtroom fell silent. She wore a navy blue suit, professional, confident, nothing like the pastel dresses Julian had preferred her in. As she raised her right hand to swear the oath, her eyes met Julian's across the courtroom. He looked genuinely shocked. This wasn't the broken, compliant woman he'd divorced. This was someone entirely new, someone who had found her voice and wasn't afraid to use it. Mrs. Sterling, Ada Wong began, please tell the court about your access to the defendant's financial records during your marriage. Victoria's voice was clear and steady. As Julian's wife, I managed our household finances and had access to all bank statements, investment accounts, and business records. I began noticing irregularities in 2019. She walked the courtroom through 5 years of evidence, each document photographed and cataloged with the precision of someone who understood that details mattered. Art purchases from galleries that didn't exist. Charitable donations to organizations with no physical addresses. Real estate deals in countries with banking secrecy laws. And did you discuss these irregularities with the defendant? Wong asked. I tried. Julian told me I was too naive to understand complex business structures. He suggested I focus on charity work and leave financial matters to him. Victoria saw Julian's attorney whisper urgently in his ear, but Julian's attention was fixed on her testimony. She could see the moment he realized she wasn't the woman he'd discarded. She was someone who had been watching, learning, and documenting his crimes for years. During cross-examination, Morrison tried to paint Victoria as a bitter ex-wife seeking revenge. Isn't it true, Ms. Sterling, that you're testifying today because you're angry about your husband's relationship with Ms. Winters? Golden Dawn. 1 year later, Victoria Sterling stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office on the 42nd floor of the Transamerica Pyramid, watching San Francisco wake up beneath a golden sunrise. The city looked different. From this height, not the intimidating maze of power and influence it had once seemed, but a place of infinite possibility. The Sterling Foundation's first quarterly report, Claire Thompson said, setting the bound document on Victoria's desk. Claire was 34, brilliant with numbers, and had left Goldman Sachs specifically to work with Victoria on her new venture. $15 million in grants distributed to organizations supporting women rebuilding after divorce. 27. Startups founded by female entrepreneurs received funding. The financial literacy programs reached over 3,000 women. Victoria picked up the report, still amazed that her name was on the cover in elegant gold lettering. The Sterling Foundation, built with the settlement money from Julian's conviction and funded by her share of the recovered assets from his criminal enterprise. And the Blackthorn Technologies acquisition? Victoria asked. Claire smiled. Alexander Kane completed the purchase last month. He's retained 80% of Julian's development team and is converting their technology to legitimate applications. The facial recognition software Julian was selling to authoritarian governments is being repurposed for medical diagnostics. A soft knock interrupted them. Victoria's assistant opened the door to admit Emma Sterling, Victoria's younger sister, carrying coffee and pastries from their favorite bakery. Celebrating the anniversary of your testimony? Emma asked, settling into one of the leather chairs facing Victoria's desk. At 38, Emma was a federal prosecutor who had watched Victoria's transformation with pride and amazement, reflecting on it, Victoria corrected. A year ago today, I was terrified I wouldn't be able to get through my testimony without falling apart. And instead, "You were the most composed witness I've ever seen," Emma said. "Julian's attorneys looked like they wanted to object to your competence." Victoria laughed, remembering the shocked expressions in the courtroom when she'd calmly walked through years of evidence. The invisible wife had become the most credible witness in a federal prosecution. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena Rodriguez. "Coffee later. Have news about the documentary." Victoria had initially resisted the idea of a documentary about her story, but Elena had convinced her that other women needed to see that escape and rebuild were possible. The film was being directed by an Academy Award winner and would premiere at next year's Sundance Film Festival. "Any word on Julian's appeal?" Claire asked. Emma shook her head. 23 years in federal prison, his attorneys filed the appeal, but there's no procedural error to challenge. His conviction was airtight. Victoria felt no satisfaction at Julian's fate, only a sense of completion. He had chosen his path, just as she had chosen hers. The difference was that her choices had been about building something meaningful, while his had been about taking from others. A chime from her computer indicated an incoming video call. Marcus Chen's face appeared on the screen, calling from his office in Seattle. "Victoria," Marcus said, his smile genuine. "Congratulations on the Foundation's first-year report. I've been reading the coverage in Forbes." "Thank you for making it possible," Victoria replied. Marcus had been instrumental in ensuring she received full compensation from Julian's criminal assets, arguing successfully that she deserved restitution as one of his victims. "I have a proposition," Marcus continued. "Kane Industries is launching a venture capital fund focused on female-founded tech companies. Alexander wondered if the Sterling Foundation might be interested in partnering on the investment strategy." Victoria looked at Claire, who nodded enthusiastically. "Send us the details," Victoria said. "We'd be very interested." After the call ended, Victoria walked to her window again. Somewhere in the city below, there were women like she had been, invisible, discounted, convinced they were powerless. The Sterling Foundation existed for them, to show them that invisibility could be a choice rather than a sentence. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman she barely recognized from 2 years ago. Gone was the careful, pleasing expression of Julian's wife, replaced by the confident bearing of someone who had rebuilt herself from nothing. She wore a red suit today, a color Julian had always said was too bold for her. "You know what I realized?" Victoria said to Claire and Emma. "Julian was right about one thing. I was naive when I married him. I believed that love and loyalty were enough, that if I just tried harder to be perfect, he would value me." "And now?" Emma asked. Victoria's smile was radiant, containing none of the sharp edges it had held during the trial. This was the expression of someone who had found peace with her power. "Now I know that I was never the problem. I was just married to someone who couldn't recognize value when he saw it." She paused, looking out at the city that had once seemed so hostile. "His loss became my liberation." Claire gathered her papers, preparing to leave. "The 2 p.m. meeting with potential grant recipients is still on your calendar." "Perfect." Victoria sat behind her desk, the same desk where she now made decisions that affected thousands of lives. "And Claire, thank you for believing in this vision." After her colleagues left, Victoria opened her laptop and began reviewing applications from women seeking foundation grants. Each story reminded her of her own journey: divorce, financial uncertainty, the struggle to rebuild an identity that had been systematically erased. One application caught her attention: a 34-year-old woman in Portland who had left an abusive marriage and was starting an art gallery focused on female artists. She needed funding to complete her first exhibition. Victoria smiled, remembering the gallery in Portland where she had first met Marcus, where she had first begun. To understand that her quiet life was really just elaborate hiding, She approved the grant with a few keystrokes. The sun was setting over San Francisco Bay when Victoria finally left her office. As she walked through the city's financial district, she passed the building where Julian's company had been headquartered. A new sign hung outside, Kane Industries West Coast Division. Victoria didn't feel triumph at the sight, only a sense of how perfectly the universe had rearranged itself. Julian's empire had been built on exploitation and lies. Its replacement was built on innovation and integrity. At home in her Pacific Heights townhouse, purchased with her own money, decorated according to her own taste, Victoria poured a glass of wine and sat on her balcony. The city lights twinkled below like fallen stars, each one representing someone's dreams and ambitions. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed Alexander Kane's name, Victoria. His voice was warm, familiar. Over the past year, their professional partnership had grown into something deeper, a relationship built on mutual respect and shared values. "Dinner tomorrow night?" "I'd love that," Victoria replied, surprised by how easy it was to say yes to someone who saw her as an equal partner rather than an accessory to his success. After they hung up, Victoria raised her wine glass to the glittering city. To second acts, she said to the night sky, and to the discovery that sometimes the end of everything you thought you wanted is just the beginning of everything you actually needed. The invisible wife was gone forever, replaced by a woman who cast shadows across boardrooms and ballrooms, who spoke truth to power because she had learned that she was power herself. In the distance, a foghorn sounded across San Francisco Bay, welcoming ships home from long journeys. Victoria Sterling was finally home too, not to a place, but to herself. The phoenix had risen. The golden dawn had come. And this was only the beginning.